Good evening and welcome to the forum. I'm Charles Royer, Director of the Institute of Politics, and it's my pleasure to welcome and introduce our guest, who is the Dennis and Elizabeth Heffernan Visiting Fellow. This program brings prominent public men and women to Harvard for brief visits designed to provide maximum contact with undergraduates in particular and with the Harvard community in general. It's managed by the Institute's Student Advisory Committee, which selects the fellows and in large part administers this program. Past visiting fellows include Bella Abzug and Gerald Ford, Eugene McCarthy and Robert McNamara, Barbara Jordan and Carla Hills, the former president of Argentina, Raul Alfonsín, Sir Geoffrey Howe, former British cabinet minister John Connolly, John Lindsay, prominent people from the world of politics who share their experiences with us in the forum. Our guest tonight served as governor of California from 1983 to 1991. He was born in New York State near Albany, moved out to California in 1955. He's a graduate of Siena College and St. John's University Law School. He, by all accounts, oversaw with extraordinary skill the growth state of California during those years he was governor, particularly improving the state's relationship with the rest of the world. The state of California, as you know, is one of the largest economies in the world if you look at it as a nation. The governor created 5 foreign trade and investment offices in Tokyo, Hong Kong, London, Frankfurt, and Mexico City, personally leading trade missions there and holding talks with heads of state and these and other international business capitals. His time as governor was also highlighted by the investment of more than $91 billion in California's public facilities, as well as tax, budgetary, and regulatory policies, which established a positive business climate in that large and important state. Governor Deukmejian served for 16 years in the California Assembly. He also served as 4 years as Attorney General of the state of California. Tonight he will talk on divided government. Is it gridlock or good government? And we're very pleased and proud to welcome to the forum the former governor of the state of California, the Honorable George Deukmejian.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Director Royer. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I have really enjoyed the last few days that I've been here at the Institute of Politics. It's been a very delightful experience. I'm very pleased and honored that I would be invited to participate, especially now that I'm out of office. You know, as a former governor, you're happy to be invited to go anywhere. And so it was very, very nice when an invitation was extended to me. And we're enjoying the Cambridge area. We're enjoying the Massachusetts area, the greater Boston area. And we're expecting, once my responsibilities are over here, to go out and to see some of the beautiful autumn fall colors that New England is so famous for. Even though I was born and raised in the Albany, New York area, as a youngster, you know, you're busy, you're studying, you're just trying to get ahead. And in those days, we didn't have very much money. You couldn't go traveling around. So you didn't get to see all of the things that you can once you get to be a little bit older. And so now we're able to enjoy some of those pleasures. And my wife, who's here tonight, sitting in the front row, she's a native daughter of California, and so she hasn't had the opportunity to see the beautiful New England area, so she's looking forward to that as well. I've, of course, been out of the public office and out of the public arena for nearly 2 years now, and I was a little bit apprehensive about accepting this invitation. I'm a little bit rusty as it relates to giving public speeches and so on. But my wife gave me some good advice, she said, don't try to be charming or witty or intellectual. She said, just be yourself. And so that's what I'll try to do tonight. This has been quite a year in California. We have had drought. We've had wildland fires. We've had earthquakes. We've had a riot. And I heard one guy on the radio say, well, he said, look at the bright side of things. At least we don't have George Deukmejian making speeches around the state. So there are some people who are happy that I'm not still there in office. And a lot of people say to me, well, why did you leave? Because when I was governor, we didn't have any limitation on the number of terms that a governor could run for. So I could have run for a third term, but I decided against it. Because, frankly, I was getting sick and tired of being in an occupation where you are, constantly you're criticized, you're ridiculed, you're the subject of cartoons, you're held in very, very low esteem. And so I said, instead of this, I want to be in a profession where you are admired and respected and looked up to. So now I'm practicing law and enjoying it very, very much, and having a lot of personal privacy and being able to come and go. And as I said earlier to Mr. Royer, now that I'm out of office, I can say whatever I want. I don't have any limitations and any restrictions. I don't have to be very diplomatic, and and it's great. It's a wonderful, marvelous feeling. Of course, we're all very interested in the coming presidential election. I know that people have been watching the debates, and they're looking forward to some additional debates and getting ready to make their final decision as to who they're going to vote for. I asked one of the students here, I said, do you think that we ought to have a person in the Oval Office who is rather short in stature, somebody who has a lust for publicity, and somebody who has a rather big ego? And the student said, why, sure. I think Madonna would make a great president. And so I don't know if all the students are plugged in yet to what's going on in the campaign, but it's a very important election, naturally, and every 4 years we have the opportunity in this country to be able to make that decision. And there have been a lot of other countries around the world where the peoples were not given that opportunity, but fortunately, our form of government, our democratic form of government, is opening up now more and more to peoples around the world who up to this point had been denied the opportunity of self-government. You heard in the introduction a little bit about the fact that I was born and raised in that the Albany, New York area. And when I became of voting age, I remember very well that we had voting machines in New York State, and maybe they still do, maybe you have them. I can remember very well that when you went to vote, you could pull one lever and vote for everybody who was on your ticket for your party. With just pull down that one lever and you cast a vote for everybody who was in your party, who was running for whatever the office was. I went to California, and it's quite different in California. First of all, in the local elections, people do not run as Republicans or Democrats. They run as nonpartisans. And even though at times you certainly know that what their political party affiliation, but on the ballot, they're not Republicans, they're not Democrats, they're there as nonpartisans. And people in California do not follow the party line very much. The political parties there are rather weak, and they have been for a long, long time. And so I would hear all the time from people saying, well, I don't vote the party, I vote for the person. And I thought, well, that sounds pretty good. Maybe it is a good idea that you just don't vote the party. And so when I started running as a candidate for office, I found out that that was a real advantage as far as I was concerned, because I was a registered Republican. I was running for the state legislature on the Republican ticket, but most of the people in my district and most of the people throughout California are registered Democratic. So there are more Democrats in the state than there are Republicans. So if people voted the party line, that would mean I wouldn't get elected and I wouldn't have any chance. And so I kind of liked the idea of people just voting for the individual and voting for the person. So I was successful in my first election that I ran for the legislature. I benefited from that fact. And however, as I came to realize, for a number of reasons, such as unfair redistricting, and because of the advantages of incumbency, the people in the state were electing individuals to the legislature mostly from the Democratic side of the aisle. And so from the day I went in to public office, I was always in the minority in the legislature. And even at that time, which was 1963, my first year that I began serving in the legislature, we had a Democratic governor, Governor Pat Brown, the father of Jerry Brown, and we were badly outnumbered in the legislature of the Republicans. I didn't like particularly being in the minority. It took a little getting adjusted. And then, of course, we got to the year 1967 when Ronald Reagan was elected as governor of California. And even though the Democrats still held control of the legislature, now at least we had a Republican in the governor's office, and he could have a significant influence on the outcome of the proceedings within the legislature itself. Now, again, Ronald Reagan would not have gotten elected governor if it hadn't been for a lot of Democrats voting for him. But he had difficulty with a legislature controlled by the other party. And all during his 8 years, with the exception of 1 year, they had control, and we, the Republicans, gained control of the state Senate for about 1 year during that period of time. When he went out of office, Jerry Brown became the governor. And Jerry Brown, as a Democrat, the legislature was of the Democratic Party, and so they had both the legislative branch and the executive branch. After 2 terms, Jerry Brown as governor, he decided to run for the United States Senate, and he lost, but in that same year, I was elected as governor of California. Now, once again, I have to underscore that I wouldn't have been elected governor because most of the registered voters are Democrats. So I benefited from the fact that people are voting for the person in California. Now, once you become the governor and you've got a legislature controlled by the other party, you begin to see a number of, you begin to see this in a different light, and you begin to recognize some of the difficulties that are involved in having divided government, with the legislative branch under the control of one party, the executive branch under the control of the other party. And of course, at the federal level, we've had a similar situation. During most of the time that Ronald Reagan was president of the United States, the Congress was controlled by the Democrats. Not all of it, but during most of his time. And of course, during the last 4 years, in the Bush administration. Again, the Democrats have control of the Congress. Now, people, the voters, wonder and they say, why is it that you folks cannot get together and resolve some of the major issues of the day? Why do you have all of these controversial battles with each other? Why is it that you can't come together and come up with solutions to many of the problems, not really recognizing that the people themselves are to blame for a lot of the gridlock that we see in the Congress or in a state government where you have a divided house? When somebody is going to vote for an individual for governor, you have to assume they're voting for that person because they agree with that person's philosophy, that person's proposed solutions to problems, that person's platform, that person's pledges and promises. So why would they turn around and vote for a member of Congress or a member of the state legislature of the other party who has an entirely different approach to government, that has a different philosophy, and once that person of the other party gets together with his or her colleagues, they set out to block what the governor or the president of the opposite party is trying to accomplish. And so many voters who vote for the person rather than the party don't always recognize that they are part of the problem when they do that, because they're sending people to the government that are, without any question, going to find themselves battling each other and making it very, very difficult to come up with proper solutions. Let me give you a few examples of what I mean. Every single year, whether you're in the state legislative, in state government or at the federal level, there is always the most major piece of work involves the passage of the budget. In state government, with which I am most familiar, the state budget bill, it's like any other piece of legislation. It's a law, it's a bill. It sets out how all of the money coming into the state government is going to be allocated for the next year. So it's the most important bill of the entire legislative session. And so when you stop and think, Republicans, generally speaking, are not in favor of expanding the size and the scope of government. Republican philosophy in general is to be opposed to placing greater tax burdens on the people, but instead to try to provide incentives to the private sector to try to expand the growth of the economy and create jobs. And then, with more people working, with them paying taxes, the revenues will come in naturally. So it's sort of their general philosophy when they're dealing with the budget, not to be thinking in terms of tax increases, not to be thinking in terms of expanding the size of government, but rather their approach is to try to look at what are our revenues going to be for the coming year, and how do we live within our means? How do we allocate these resources that we expect coming in, and then decide how we're going to divide it up and spend it, whether it's for education or health and welfare or for prisons or whatever the program and government service may be. On the other hand, I think the general philosophy of Democratic leaders certainly has been, no, we think that government should be the one that's more involved in trying to solve some of our problems, in trying to provide more services to people, to try to have, let's say, increased amounts of expenditures for a variety of governmental programs because it's their philosophy that people are expecting government to provide these services, and they're looking to government to be of help to them. So these are two very different approaches and philosophy to the passage of the most important piece of legislation in any given legislative session. And so when the legislature is controlled by one party and the governor or the president the other, I think you can see why you have the kind of clashes that you generally will read about and get a lot of high visibility each year. Now, this particular year in California, we have had very serious economic and financial problems. And because of the fact that the economy has been flat, because of the fact that we've had cutbacks in defense expenditures, which have meant reductions in monies going into the defense industries, reductions in a lot of our military installations, cutbacks in the aerospace industry and the like, because of all these things, we have, and other factors, we've had the economy becoming stagnant and no real increase in revenues going into the state treasury. So you take the existing laws, and the existing laws require that the government increase spending for a variety of programs. The law requires that if you have an increase in enrollment in the schools, if you have an increase in the number of people that are eligible to receive medical care or welfare benefits, that they are entitled to receive these benefits. You have a lot of different federal rules and regulations where you have programs involved with state and federal governments that you have to adhere to these federal rules and regulations. And so when you're putting that budget together, you've got all of these pressures that come to play, and in the time of a recession, the revenues are not there. So what do? How do you go about allocating what is available, and how do you meet the goals and the objectives that were set out by those who ran for office, the governor, members of the legislature? Well, this year, because of that very difficult situation, we had a deadlock, we had a gridlock in our government, and it went well past the constitutionally required deadline for passing the budget. And again, if we didn't have divided government, I'm not saying we wouldn't have any problems. We'd have some problems. But if we didn't have divided government, at least the legislative branch, the executive branch would be approaching the task pretty much along the same philosophical guidelines and approach. Let me give you another way in which this affects what happens. If you're sitting in the governor's chair, or this applies to the president as well, if you've got a legislative body controlled by the other party, you know, at least in our situation, that if you propose a specific program, and that program is going to include an allocation of money, that once you announce as governor that you're proposing this program with a specific dollar amount, that the legislature, controlled by the other party, is going to know that you want this program, and if you expect to get it, then they're going to extract something from you. They know that once you have gone on record publicly and made this announcement, and you say, I pledged to the public that I would do this, here's my program, it's going to cost $20 million, let's say, they know that they've got you. And if you don't want to appear as though you were unsuccessful if you don't want to appear as though you were not able to get your program through, you've got to go to them and you've got to deal. Now, in most instances, in my experience, the Democratic Party leaders would take that program and they would double it. They would say, okay, that's a great idea, except let's make it $40 million instead of $20 million. Let's expand the scope of the program to cover more people and so on. Now, if you eventually get that bill sent back to you in its final form, and instead of 20 million, it's 40 million, and you know, because of all of the other programs in the budget, that might put your budget out of whack, what do you have to do? You have to cut the 20 million that they added, right? You have to pare it down and to make sure that it fits in with everything else. And what's the headline? The headline is, the governor cut $20 million, and he doesn't have any compassion, and he's a cruel person, and he's acting out of being nasty, and he doesn't recognize that there are all these unmet needs out there. So many times you would have a program that you initiated yourself, you wind up, it comes back to you, you hardly recognize it, and you either have to veto it or you have to cut it. And again, because of this divided government type of situation. And so, or I'll give you another example. Instead of them doubling the program, they say, okay, we'll let you have this program, but you've got to agree to sign legislation or support a program that we're advocating, and in most cases, any new program is going to cost additional monies. And then the question becomes, do we have the money, and can we, in effect, work out some kind of compromise? I had proposed a program to take people who are on welfare, to help them to be able to get the necessary job skills and to get them looking for work and to get off of welfare as quickly as possible. In California, we call this program the GAIN program. Well, once I announced that this was a program that I wanted to put through, it started. And before that was done, I'm going to tell you, the Democrats in the legislature made us accept so many amendments to that program that before we were done, a person on welfare who was able-bodied, usually a mother with child or children, and in order to get that person into a job, we had to virtually stipulate that this person could go ahead and get educated from, complete high school if she hadn't completed it, go through college and go all the way through, get higher education and the full, educational program before that person would have to get off of welfare and to get into a job. They built in so much in terms of the expenditures in order to qualify this person for the program that unfortunately, a year or two later, we had to begin to cut back on the amount of monies available because this was putting the whole program out of budget. So these are some of the things that where they would link one to another, and again, because of the divided government situation, it creates those kinds of problems. Also, I think we have to, as voters and as the public, we have to begin to ask ourselves, now which is better? And I know that there's an honest difference of opinion about this. Is it better to, again, simply select people based upon their particular qualifications, regardless of whether or not they're going to be in agreement with the person that I'm going to vote for governor or president, or should we vote more
the straight party line ticket. Now, as most of you will know, in Great Britain, they have the parliamentary system. In the parliamentary system, you have people who go and vote for members of parliament, and then whatever party is the majority party in the parliament, that party picks as their leader the person to become the prime minister and to head up the cabinet, and the members of the cabinet also come out of the parliament, and so that the executive branch of government in the parliamentary system is the same as the majority of the members in the parliament itself. And if the public doesn't like their performance, then of course the prime minister has to call an election at least once every 5 years, and the people can vote to make a change. And if there are a greater number of people elected to parliament in the other party, then the government goes out and the other party comes in, but you have the same party whether it's in the executive branch as well as in the legislative branch. Now, there are people in the news media especially, and there are others, but especially in the news media, who measure progress by the number of governmental programs that are enacted in a given legislative session or over the term of an elected official. By that I mean, if you propose a new governmental program, and it's usually got a title, some kind of a name to it, and it's going to provide either an expanded service or a new service, and if that program is enacted, usually the media will report this and characterize it as an accomplishment. Now, if you don't have a new program, generally speaking, the media will say there was nothing achieved. The chief executive is nothing but a caretaker. The chief executive is just a manager, but there really wasn't any progress. And so the way it has evolved in recent history at the federal level and at the state level is that unless the media sees an expansion of government, new programs being created, generally speaking, they will characterize an administration as not having accomplished very much, even though by holding down the growth of the size of government, by holding down the amount of increases in the tax burden, by helping to stimulate the economy and creating more job opportunities, you're creating opportunities for people. By helping to ensure that people get a good education and are prepared to take on the jobs that are available, there's really a tremendous amount that is being accomplished, but it doesn't have the label of a new or expanded government program. And again, when you are in a divided government situation, knowing that every time you propose some new type of program, that the other party is going to leverage you for something that they want, or they're going to double the size of that program and then some, what happens is the chief executive holds back, and you begin to realize that instead of you proposing it, let them propose it. Let them come forward with the program, and you sit there, and because of your veto authority, you can say to them, and the members of your party in the legislative branch says to the majority party in the legislative branch, okay, if you people want that program, we'll deal with you. But if you don't design that to fit our requirements, then the governor is going to veto the legislation, and we've got enough votes to sustain his veto. And that is another way of dealing with this situation that you find from experience when you've got divided government, that you've got to proceed in that fashion, but you do it at some risk, because the news media, again, will say, well, he didn't propose that. It was forced on him by the other party. And he only did this after he was pulled, screaming and yelling, into having to make some kind of an arrangement with them. So when you read some of these accounts of what goes on, and when you've got this divided government situation, I hope that you can appreciate a little more what some of the issues are that are involved. Right now we're seeing in this campaign how President Bush is saying, you know, I've proposed any number of programs, but I can't get them through the Congress. Well, in an election year, the Congress is not going to vote for something where the news media and the public is going to say the president was successful in getting this program passed. Instead, they're going to want to keep the difficult conditions until the election is over with, and to make it appear as though the president was not able to get his programs through the Congress. So a lot of this is going on all the time. It's part of our political process. I'm not advocating tonight, and nor have I at any time advocated that we go to the parliamentary system. I don't know whether Americans would ever want to do that. But what I am advocating is that I hope that there will be a lot of discussion and consideration given to what the effects are of having divided government. And if we really expect to be able to resolve a lot of these issues, difficult issues, that we've got to have people in the legislative branch as well as the executive branch, excuse me, who are on the same wavelength and who are sort of approaching these issues in the same manner. And by doing that, I think we've got a much better chance of being able to bring about a better resolution. Well, we have problems within our own system, but as we have said many, many times, nevertheless, it's probably the best system that exists anywhere in the world, and we're very, very fortunate. And I would like to urge the students who are involved in the Institute of Politics to consider very, very seriously carrying the interest that they have, because of the fact that they're attending a lot of the programs here at the Institute of Politics, to carry that interest forward and to commit a good part of their adult professional life to public service, because we have to have good people who are willing to dedicate themselves, who are willing to serve, if we're going to be able to maintain our leadership position throughout the world. And it's extremely important that people with good education, people who have a strong personal interest in government, dedicate themselves to service. It is the kind of occupation where you have to sacrifice some of the material things that you might otherwise acquire if you're out in the private sector. You're not going to get rich by being in public office, but you are going to be richly rewarded with tremendous amount of satisfaction that you are serving your fellow man and your neighbors and your friends and your families. You're helping to maintain the freedoms that we enjoy in this country, and you're trying your best to provide good government, clean, honest government, having people with integrity serving the public And it's so important that we continue to encourage individuals to do this. Let me say that if you enter public life, strive to be the best. Remember that it's important that you carry out your responsibilities with the highest degree of honesty and integrity. No matter what period of time you serve, no matter which level of government you serve in, you want to, when you walk away from that position, you want to do so having established a reputation for honesty, for integrity, that you did your very best, that you worked very hard to make a contribution to society. And of course, there's always room for one more good person in whatever profession you choose for yourself. Sometimes you sit back and you are thinking about, well, what should your major be? What field should you go into? And somebody might say, oh, that field's too crowded. Somebody might say there's too many doctors, there's too many lawyers, there's too many engineers, or whatever it may be. Forget about that. There's always room for one more good person, regardless of what the business or profession or occupation may be. And as long as you do your best, you're going to be successful, not only for yourself, but you're going to be successful on behalf of the people in your families and the people that know you well. One thing that I would say to you, don't at any time think that it is somehow going into public service, that it is not of the same level as some other profession in the eyes of the public. Not so. I think as a private citizen, you know and you recognize the importance of the people who are serving us. And if you don't like some of the things you're reading about, then get in there and try to make a real difference. And you have an opportunity to do that as you start out in your adult professional life. So with that, I will close and thank you very, very much for your attention and wish you all the very, very best. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Governor. We have microphones on both sides of the room. If you would like to ask Governor a question, we have some time for that. And please just identify yourselves and we'll call on you in an alternating fashion. We'll start right here.
Hi, Governor Duke Major. My name is Craig Turk. I'm a senior at the college, and I'm actually from Orange County, California. Given your newfound freedom to talk now that you're out of office, and the interesting perspective that you must have, could you just comment briefly on the candidacy of Jerry Brown for the Democratic nomination for president?
Oh, I'd be delighted. Be delighted. Remember that 800 number he had when he was running? I called that 800 number, and somebody answered, and they said, "This is Mars." Jerry has been out in outer space for some time. He's a very different person, very, very different, and everybody who knows him well. And I was in the legislature during the 8 years that he was governor, and all of his friends, and whether they're friends or some of his opponents, the one thing everybody will agree on, and that's that Jerry Brown is a very different individual. Having said that, at times you wonder, he wants to express his views on issues, but he doesn't ever want to really stick to anything. When he was governor, for example, if he had a particular proposal, he would work on it for about 90 days, and then he'd be off onto something else. And this was his history. He never
really stayed the course. He never really was persistent he was always thinking about some new ideas, but there was never much follow-through. And of course, after 2 terms as governor, when he ran for U.S. Senator, he was defeated. So he was out of politics for a while. And then he came back. I mean, he hasn't had any gainful employment since he left the governor's office. He came back. He was going to be he wanted to become the chairman of the Democratic Party in California. He did that for a little while. And then, of course, he went off running for president, and we all know, what happened after that. So he's a very, very different person. Now, his father was governor. His father's quite different. And now his sister, Kathleen Brown, has recently been elected as the state treasurer of California. And she's not at all like Jerry Brown. And a lot of people think that she will probably run for governor one day and might have a good shot at it, depending upon, the situation. Mark?
I'm Mark Mofid. I'm an undergraduate at the college and a native of La Cañada, Flintridge, California. Thank you for joining us here tonight, Mr. Governor. I have a question that relates to the budget crisis that California just went through. An issue that was central to the budget crisis was that of funding for education. And I can't help but remember how this theme of funding for education has worked itself out over the past 15 years. I can remember the conflicts that you had with former school superintendent Bill Honig, and back when California had the budget surplus, there was the question of where those funds should go, whether that should be put back into the education. Are we going to ever resolve this issue so that it doesn't keep cropping up every few years? And why do you think that there has been so much conflict between the parties, between the governor and the legislature on funding for education? And what are possible and potential solutions?
Well, as you heard in the introduction, I spent 16 years in the legislature, in the Assembly, and in the Senate, and then 8 years as governor. Anyway, for a total of 28 years in state government. There has never been 1 year when the education community has ever said they have enough money. I don't care whether you're in good times or bad times, there is never enough money as far as the education community is concerned. Every single year when I was in the legislature, they would come in and they would be pushing and urging, more money for education. During the 8 years that I was governor, funding for the kindergarten through 12th grade public school level, the funding increased 115%, while enrollment only went up 23%. And yet, every year, I was severely criticized by teachers' union leaders and other educators in the K through 12, and Superintendent Honig. By the way, he's not the former superintendent. I wish he was former. He's still there. They were constantly criticizing us that this was not enough money. When you take the funding for kindergarten through 12th grade and you add to that the funding for higher education, all support for education in California receives 53% of the state budget. Over half of it is going for education. 32% of the budget goes for health and welfare programs. So those two areas account for 85% of the budget. Now, when you have a budget shortfall like we did this year and last year, where are you going to get the money to make up for, let's say, a $10 billion budget gap is what they were confronted with, unless you go to these big ticket items that are in the budget? You cannot find that kind of money
and take it out of the remaining 15% of the budget. So you have to take some of that, to meet that shortfall and come up with a balanced budget, you have to look at the health and welfare programs and at the education programs. All that I was saying when I was governor and that Governor Wilson is saying is, look, education has to participate in this whole budget process like everybody else. They're still, even with the reductions that took place this year, they are still the #1 priority in the budget, albeit that they're not getting as much money as they have in the past or that they would like to have. So that's essentially the difficulty. And so I can tell you that we didn't have any kind of problems with higher education, even though the support that we gave to higher education was slightly less than we gave to kindergarten through 12th grade. The University of California, during my 8 years, their budget increased by about 90%. Same thing is true in general terms with the California State University system. And they were not complaining like the K through 12 people. But the leadership of the teachers' unions especially, and Mr. Honig and so on, are in there complaining bitterly. And I don't think, they're only looking at their area. And sure, I mean, you say, well, that's natural. But a governor and the legislature, they have to consider all of the programs, not just that one particular program.
Thanks.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Mike Gleason from Ridgefield, Connecticut. You're talking earlier in your talk about how the press, when you don't get anything done, how the press complains, well, he just was a caretaker or something like that. The main philosophy of Republicans who get into office, with a few exceptions, seems to be to not try to expand government anymore or to get rid of some of the things that have been done before. But there seems to be a natural resistance in the media. Anyway, my question is, do you see any way we can change this? Or
well, I would like to see more conservative young people going into the media. Unfortunately, we don't seem to find that. We seem to find that most of the people who get involved in as reporters, or especially political reporters, tend to lean, for the most part, more toward the Democratic and the liberal side, whereas a lot of the conservative young people are looking more for careers in the private commercial sector rather than in the media area. So I don't know how else you do it other than trying the best you can to craft your message, to try to inform the public and try to, if you can, get your message to the public in ways other than just through the political writers. And sometimes you can do that in a campaign. You can do that when you're buying some of your commercial time and so forth. There are some other ways you try to do it, but it's difficult. It's difficult.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Caputo, and I'm a junior at the college. I'd like to thank you for coming to the Institute of Politics, first of all. It's great to hear you. I have a question actually about what it's like to be a governor. Given the fact that Governor Clinton is running for president, I would like to hear from you what qualities you believe as a successful governor will make a successful president.
I have become acquainted with Governor Clinton. We both served as governors at the same time through our National Governors Association. I have become acquainted with him. I observed him, the work he did through the association, and I greatly admire his abilities. He's a very bright, very intelligent, very articulate young man, a person who has excellent interpersonal skills. He gets along well with people, and I think he's got a tremendous amount of abilities. However, I have to say that when we get down to voting for president, it always gets down to a question of you only can choose between, in this case, 3 people. Usually it's 2 people. It's not that we have the ability to pick the very best person to do the job. In our system, after the primaries are over with, your choice is between, let's say, 2 people. And when you then stop and compare the background, the experience of the 2 major candidates, then I have to say, having been a governor, I have to acknowledge that even if I were running for president, coming from California, a very large state, very populous state, large, as you heard, economy and so on, I don't feel like, I would have the appropriate experience. And to come from governing a very small state, I don't know what the population is of Arkansas, but I doubt if it's more than 3 million people, maybe, I don't know. But we're like 30 million in California. And to deal with the kinds of problems that we have in our state, and with a lot of different, ethnic communities and so on that we have that I don't think they have in Arkansas and what have you. And then he has no federal and no international experience whatsoever. So I think when you start to look at the qualifications needed to be in the White House and to lead the federal government, then I feel that even though he's an outstanding individual, having to make that choice, it would seem to me that people would pick somebody with a lot more experience and knowledge about the federal level.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for coming, Governor. My name is Mark Goffman. I'm a public policy student here at the Kennedy School. In one of my courses here, we just studied the California water system, which seems to go through this elaborate organization of public and private enterprise, ultimately costing something like $100 per acre foot to the urban areas, and water is then costing about $10 per acre foot to a lot of the rural areas for farming. And it just seems to me, especially after looking at this issue, that it could be done a lot more equally. And I understand the problems in trying to get any kind of farm subsidy off the books. But from a governor's point of view, what's the feasibility of even addressing this issue in the legislature or publicly?
Well, it certainly is an issue that does deserve to have a considerable amount of discussion, does deserve to be considered in terms of, for our state, we don't have enough water for all of our needs, for agriculture as well as for the urban areas. And we have had drought conditions, below normal conditions, for the last 5 or 6 years. A lot of the costs of water are the result of federal legislation, not state legislation. And when the state water program was put into operation, certain commitments were made to agriculture at that time. And in exchange for those commitments, agriculture gave a lot of support to getting the state water program approved by the public and getting it into operation. Also, agriculture is one of our largest industries in the state. And not only do we feed the people in California, but feed people all over the world. And in order for us to be competitive with agriculture throughout the world, that's another factor when it comes to the cost. So if we want to maintain what is approximately a $15 billion industry in the state, and to keep it competitive, you also have to realize that agriculture in most countries is subsidized. And one of the big fights that's going on right now in the international trade arena is that the countries that are members of what's called GATT, the Organization for the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, the big fight right now is over agricultural subsidies in the European countries and in Japan and so on. And America is trying to get all the countries to eliminate the subsidies, and saying that they eliminate the subsidies, we'll eliminate the subsidies, and let's have free and fair trade and so on. If that happens, then I think you might see some changes being made in the programs that you're referring to. But right now, we've still got to stay competitive, or we're going to have more unemployment in California, which we can't stand right now.
Good evening, Governor Deukmejian. What role, if any, have you played in the Bush campaign in California so far? And is it true that they're really kind of conceding California and basically shutting down the operation there to concentrate elsewhere?
Yes, 4 years ago when President Bush ran for his first term, I was the chairman of his campaign in California. And so as chairman, I headed up the campaign, and we worked very, very hard. And he carried California, not by a large margin, only by about 300,000 votes, which isn't very much in that size state, but he won. This year, Governor Wilson is the chairman of the Bush campaign in California. I have not had any involvement in the campaign. I'd be willing to, but I really haven't been asked to do anything other than to send money. And I think you're right. I think from all appearances, it appears as though some decisions have been made by the hierarchy in the Bush campaign to basically write off California. I guess they feel that based upon the polls that they're taking, that he's so far behind that they're going to use their resources elsewhere. And so I suspect that's one of the reasons why I haven't been asked to do very much.
Good evening, Governor. My name is Andres. I'm an undergraduate here at the college and from California, Berkeley, California. I was wondering, as you pointed out, we are a democratic state with a big D, democratic. Why, in your opinion, do we, at least for the last 12 years, have we voted for Republican governors? I mean, why do we continue to have divided government in the minds of the voters?
Well, I guess the obvious answer is that we were the superb candidates, and when the people were trying to decide, in my case, my opponent in both of my elections, both the first and second election, both times, was Mayor Tom Bradley, the mayor of Los Angeles. And the first time I won by a squeaker, by a very, very narrow margin. The second time I won by a very significant majority. And then in the Pete Wilson campaign, his opponent was the former mayor of San Francisco, Dianne Feinstein, and very well-respected Democrat, well-respected in public office and so on, very well known throughout the state. She spent probably $20 million. He probably spent $23 million in the campaign, so it wasn't a case of one having a lot more money than the other, but he wound up the winner. The voters decided to pick him. You have to say, for a number of reasons, but some of it has to do, again, with the approach to government, coming in and not trying to expand upon the size of government, not wanting to increase the amount of taxes, these kinds of issues, along with the background and experience. Pete Wilson has had experience as a state legislator, as the mayor of San Diego, as a United States senator, local, federal, state experience, all of that I think was very beneficial for him, plus his position on the issues. I don't know.
If I could just follow up, Governor, in your mind then, if the voters of California are voting for these principles, these Republican principles, then why do we not then vote that way for our legislators? I mean, why? What is the distinction in your mind that you think the voters are making?
Yeah, that's a good question, which I failed to cover in my remarks, and I'm glad you raised it. A lot of voters will vote for the incumbent assemblyman, the incumbent senator, the incumbent congressman, because either they feel close to that person, because that person represents their district. They receive mail on a continuing basis from their elected representative. They get these newsletters and so on that are sent out at government expense. The voters get some kind of attachment, and their local assemblyman, senator, or congressman is, generally speaking, trying to bring some kinds of government programs or government funding to the district. Or they are in the news in which they are carrying forward the position of that district at the state or the federal level. And so the voter says, I don't like those bunch of people who are up there in the legislature, but I like my assemblyman. I like my senator. They're okay. I don't like Congress. I don't like the fact that all those clowns are bouncing bad checks and they don't know how to run the House post office and so on. But I like my congressman because they have some kind of attachment to it. So that's one of the big reasons why they do it. And the other reason is that if you do not have fair redistricting, if you don't have fair reapportionment after each census, then very often the way those district lines are drawn, the party that's in the majority can draw those district lines in a way in which they create a majority of so-called safe districts. So no matter what you do, that incumbent has a decided advantage. Unless that incumbent goes out and commits a felony, chances are in a safe district they're going to get reelected. And so if you've got a safe district, it's hard to get an opponent to run against the incumbent. It's hard to get somebody to convince a good person that they have a chance to win. And so very often the opposing party puts up, there's a weak candidate that comes in. They can't raise money. And so you don't really have a good choice. You don't have a good choice, and voters tend to go along with the name that they recognize and vote for the incumbent. Those are the basic reasons why that happens.
If we can move quickly, we'll take these three questions.
Good evening, Governor. I'm asking this question to you as one who, as governor of California, had a national reputation of being a moderate, inclusive governor who successfully kept the famous, legendary far right in California at bay during your governorship. The Republican Party in 1996 looks like it's going to be in for one hell of a Donnybrook with the far right trying to take over. It seems like all the candidates being spoken of are on the right. There are a lot of great Republican governors of big states out there that aren't being spoken of as candidates. As a moderate governor who, as I said, kept the right at bay, what do you think the moderates can do? What advice would you have for them to try and, maintain some sort of power, at least in the party, not be pushed out? And how do you think some of these governors could possibly come to the forefront?
Well, first of all, while we all have our interpretations and characterizations of labels, I think most people would probably describe me as a conservative rather than as a moderate. But I was never one who was an extreme conservative. I was never one who was threatening to the moderates or to liberals or to Democrats. And I think Ronald Reagan was probably an individual that we know more about nationally. And again, he was very conservative, but the way in which he advocated his conservative positions was that he didn't really come across as an extremist or threatening to the moderates or the liberals. The people who place themselves in the moderate wing of the party, unfortunately, they don't work very hard. They don't work very hard. The people who are the very active conservatives, and the same is true in the Democratic Party, the people who are the activists in the Democratic Party are generally those that are on the far left end of the spectrum politically as liberals. This election with Bill Clinton getting the nomination is a surprise to a lot of people, because he has never been painted in the real liberal wing of the party. But that seems to be an exception, and they are learning, the Democrats are learning from the experience they had with McGovern and with Mondale and with Dukakis, and finally, they nominated somebody who cannot be described as being ultra-liberal. The Republicans, who are moderates, if they expect to elect or nominate the next candidate for president or whatever, they're going to have to get out and work. In our state, we have a lot of different volunteer organizations. The volunteers who are members of the conservative groups are the ones who work the hardest. And the liberal or moderate organizations are very ineffectual. And they don't have large memberships, they don't go out and work. And there may be a lot of them who would prefer a moderate candidate, but they're not willing to go out and mix it up like the activist conservatives are.
Sir?
My name is Anthony Gastelum. I'm a planning major at MIT from Fresno, California. What I wanted to know was, what was it that motivated you to run for public office? I was really impressed with your remarks about public service. And when did you first recognize the opportunity to actually become governor? And what did you have to do in order to attain that goal?
I guess my first indication of an interest in government started when I was about 20 years old. Somebody in my small village outside of Albany encouraged me to be a volunteer, and so I was a volunteer in the Governor Dewey, Harry Truman campaign for president. And Governor Dewey was the governor of New York, and I was given the task of spending the weekend in the state capitol next to a teletype machine that was hooked up to the campaign train upon which Dewey was campaigning across the country. And if any messages came in over the teletype machine, my responsibility was to get that message to the right person. So going back to 1948 is when I first was invited to be a volunteer, and I did. I was also rewarded for that by being given a credential as an assistant sergeant at arms at the National Republican Convention in Philadelphia. And that was pretty heady stuff, for a 20-year-old to be attending a national convention like that. I didn't do too much after that until about 1952, and when Eisenhower was running again, I just kind of volunteered as a volunteer. But I began to notice that when I would pick up the newspaper, for example, I liked to read about current events. I would generally read the stories on the front page before turning to the sports pages. I don't know why. I don't know why, but I just had this inherent interest in government, in current events, and I think in politics. And so then I just continued to be a volunteer. And in 1960, in California. Now I'm in California. In 1960, I was active in my community, and I was asked if I would be campaign chairman for the assemblyman who was running for re-election. And I did that. He got re-elected. And then 2 years later, he said, I've decided not to run again. He had been in office for a few years. And so I talked with my wife about it, and we decided that I would get in. And that's kind of how it started. I ran in the year of 1962. I had 3 opponents in the primary. I won the primary, won the election, and kind of it went from there. And then I went from the Assembly to the Senate, and then to Attorney General, and then to Governor. But
at what point did the governorship enter your mind?
when I was Attorney General, I had, up to that point, had as my special area of interest in government, I had done a lot of work in the area of crime and law enforcement type legislation, and been very involved in that area. And I thought that once I became Attorney General that would be it. That would be the pinnacle for me. And I was successful in getting elected. I might add, I lost the first time. I tried to become Attorney General 8 years before that in 1970, and I lost in the Republican primary. But 8 years later, 1978, I was successful, got elected. And so I was getting toward the end of my first term. And it was at that point that Jerry Brown decided that he was going to leave the office and run for U.S. Senator. So the question then opened up, do I run for governor now when there's an open seat? In other words, no incumbent. Or do I just run for re-election as Attorney General? And, you know, a lot of my friends and my supporters, looking at other people who were thinking of running for governor, and they, you know, urged me to do it. And so I decided to do it. And we had a contested primary, and anyway, it turned out that I won. But again, once I got into it, once I started in the legislature and so on, and with my inherent interest in government, I found that I found a lot of satisfaction in serving in public service.
Thanks.
Last question.
Make this fairly quick. What do you think the effects on California politics will be over the next several years as term limits start cutting in, and I guess the power of the assembly, especially the permanent assembly, weakens and possibly goes away?
Yeah. I wish I was clairvoyant. I wish I knew what is actually going to happen. The jury is, of course, going to be out for the next 5 years or so until we see how this works. There's no question that many of the incumbents who have been there a long time are going to have to leave. Be a lot of new people come in. The question becomes, does the state as a whole benefit from this kind of turnover with a lot of new people, new ideas and so on, or does the state wind up losing because we're losing a lot of experienced people? And does that mean that the special interest groups that are represented by the lobbyists and so on are going to have more influence because they're more knowledgeable and because they've been there longer and they know the ropes? So is it going to turn out where they're going to see an advantage as compared to the public as a whole? We don't know the answer to that yet. We also do know this, that a lot of legislators, because they know their time is limited, a lot of them are going to be looking to run for some other office. So if you're an assemblyman and you know you only have 6 years, they're going to be, you know, working and maneuvering and doing whatever they have to do to either run for the Senate or run for the Congress and so on. Is that good or bad? I don't know. It's good in a sense because if they want to have support from the public, that means they've got to be responsive to to the public. Just because somebody has ambitions to run for another office doesn't mean that they're not going to act in the best interest of the public. One of the things about why do you have 2-year terms for an assemblyman, the whole idea is because if you have to run every 2 years, or as a congressman, that you're going to be more responsive to the people that you represent because you have to go to them in order to get another term. So we don't know exactly how this is going to, what the ultimate results are going to be, but it's going to be a lot of fun for me on the outside watching it and not having to, be affected by it other than as a private citizen. Okay?
Governor, thank you so much. We're grateful that you came to visit with us. Thank you all for coming. You should know that we've worked Governor Deukmejian about 13 hours today, so he'd be happy, I'm sure, to say, to greet you and on his way out. But once again, thank you for coming. And Governor, thanks for sharing your experiences with us. We're delighted to have had you.
Thank you very much.